If you have not heard this story coming out of Israel, there was a mosque that was attacked. There were Palestinian worshipers that were in that mosque during that time. And this mosque is actually very special. We're going to get into why that's special in just a second. But it has gotten to the point now in Israel where Palestinians can't even go to a mosque and pray without being attacked. And it's really frustrating to me when people feel like the solution is a two-state solution. And I'm going to show you tonight why that is not a good idea. Because the idea of having a two-state solution, this idea of separate but equal, you have to understand that it would not be equal. They can't even go to the mosque and pray. Let's get into it.
But we begin with breaking news out of occupied East Jerusalem, where Israeli forces have stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque and fired rubber-coated bullets and stun grenades during Ramadan prayers. Video shows women and children crying for help as Israeli forces beat Palestinian worshippers with batons. A few Palestinians have been reported injured. Israeli forces are accusing worshippers of barricading themselves after exceeding the agreed timings.
What were they doing? They were praying. That's it.
Hundreds have been forcibly removed from the site. Let's bring in Al Jazeera's Natasha Ghonim, who joins us on the phone from occupied East Jerusalem. Natasha, what more do we know happened?
Well, I do want to point out that this is not a surprise. Yesterday on social media, I saw the bombastic rhetoric circulating on social media with calls for Palestinians to come to Al-Aqsa Mosque in anticipation of the Passover holiday on Wednesday morning, in which Jews will be expected from 7 o'clock in the morning until 11:30 to visit the compound as part of non-Muslim visiting hours. So these type of clashes, again, were expected based on what I was seeing on social media. As you mentioned, the police are saying that dozens of people barricaded themselves inside Al-Aqsa Mosque late Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. They say, the police, that the people had a stockpile of stones, sticks, and fireworks. The police say that they attempted to coax the people to come outside of the mosque. There was an agreement with the compound authorities that no one would be spending the night. Police say when they could not coax the people to come out peacefully, that is when they entered the mosque and began firing stun guns and forcibly removing people. As you said, people have been, there have been some injuries and there have been arrests.
Yeah. And we've seen them forcibly remove Palestinians from their homes as well. You have to ask the question, who is supplying them with the arms, right? For them to come in and just beat the Palestinian people, the guns that they've used on Palestinian people, who supplies that? That would be the United States government, right? Always remember that.
The Jordanian Foreign Ministry is condemning this attack. The Jordanians are the custodians of this holy site. Hamas as well is also condemning this, saying it is an unprecedented crime and people, quote, should inflict upon the occupation the price of this crime.
The images we've seen are quite shocking. Some of them, at least, are still pictures that we've seen of worshippers in handcuffs lying on the ground. And again, stun grenades being fired as people prayed. Natasha, remind us of the significance of this site of Al-Aqsa and why it's such a flashpoint of tensions between Palestinians and Israelis.
So you have to understand, too, notice that they mentioned that they also had grenades. So it wasn't just like they didn't just come in there and beat them. They came in there to blow things up.
Well, we should also remind our viewers that these types of images and these types of clashes are not new. It's an ongoing cycle of violence, especially at a time like this. So this year, as last year, Ramadan Passover, and Easter are all overlapping. So that's increased the desire for the people who follow the three monotheistic religions to enter the compound. In this case, we're talking about Jews, particularly, and Muslims. And how do the clashes really begin? It's an issue of access and restrictions. Palestinians have already been restricted to access the mosque during Ramadan. If you're 55 years old or younger and you're a man, you're going to need a permit to enter.
So this is how difficult they've made it for them, to the point where they need permits to enter the mosque at a certain time. This is how strict things are now. This is how strict it has become. People need to wake up.
And now, of course, people are being told that during this period of Ramadan, they would not be permitted to spend the night inside the mosque. On Wednesday morning, beginning at 7 o'clock local and until 11:30, Jews will be expected in larger numbers than usual to come into the compound in honor of Passover holiday. They will not be allowed to pray. That is a red line. They never enter the mosque, but they do roam around the compound. And this is obviously always a very tense situation. The Palestinians feel very strongly about it, because the type of Jews that enter for visiting hours for non-Muslims tend to be very conservative nationalists.
Okay, Natasha, thank you very much for that update. Let's show you the scene now in Nablus in the occupied.
Just a reminder, this is under Netanyahu.
West Bank, where, as you can see, people have taken to the streets to protest there after the storming of the Al-Aqsa Mosque earlier by Israeli forces, who fired rubber-coated bullets and stun grenades during Ramadan prayers. People taking to the streets to protest this latest action by Israeli forces. We'll keep a close eye on the situation there and bring you the latest as and when we.
And the United States government continues to support it. Show me how they're not. Show me how they're not. They're aiding them. I don't see them aiding the Palestinians. Do you? Now, I want to explain to you the significance of that particular mosque. It says, row after Israeli police raid. I don't know why part of this is cut off, but oh well. Where is Al-Aqsa Mosque? And why is it so important in Islam? So this piece is important for people to understand. Make this a little, their font is a little on the tiny side. There we go. Oh, I guess I do have to keep it that way. Okay. The Al-Aqsa lies at the heart of Jerusalem's old city on a hill known to Jews as Har Habat, or Temple Mount, to Muslims internationally, or as Al-Haram Al-Sharif, or the Noble Sanctuary. So let me go down to this part right here. Muslims regard the site as the third holiest in Islam, after Mecca and Medina. Al-Aqsa is the name given to the whole compound and is home to two Muslim holy places, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, also known as the Qibli Mosque, which was built in the 8th century AD. This piece right here is important as well. The compound overlooks the Western Wall, a sacred place of prayer for Jews, for whom the Temple Mount is their most sacred site. Jews believe biblical King Solomon built the first temple there 3,000 years ago. A second temple was raised by the Romans in AD 70. Israel captured the site in the 1967 Middle East War and annexed it with the rest of East Jerusalem and adjoining parts of the West Bank in a move not recognized internationally. Now, I want to get into this piece here about the two-state solution, because this is something that you will hear more people say, that what would solve this is the two-state solution. So I want to play this video clip here that shows you why that is not necessarily the best solution. And people have to really understand that what you're talking about here is a form of what I like to call a separate but equal. And we've seen before in this country how separate but equal does not work, because yes, you can be separate, but the facilities and the treatment will not be equal. We've seen this happen before. Let's get into this clip.
A two-state solution is exactly what it says. It would redraw the existing borders and create an Israeli state and a Palestinian state side by side. The roots of it lie in a UN resolution back in 1974. Among other things, it affirmed the Palestinians' right to self-determination without external interference. Over the years, there have been efforts to try to reach that two-state solution. The US has been at the heart of the negotiations. The Oslo Accords, for example, in 1993. The Camp David summit in the year 2000, which ended without an agreement. And that's because there are some big challenges.
So you see, that was Bill Clinton there. This goes all the way back to Bill Clinton, right?
Where would you draw the border between the two sides? What would you do about the illegal settlements Israel's been building on the West Bank? And what happens to the Palestinian refugees?
Let's look at the border, because this is the good question when people say two-state solution. The question that he's asking is, where exactly would you put the border? So here we go. Here's the map. Where would you draw the border? And where would you draw the border so that it will be equal? It's not going to be equal land. There's no way.
Two sides. What would you do about the illegal settlements Israel's been building on the West Bank? And what happens to the Palestinian refugees? And Jerusalem. Both sides claim all or part of the city as their capital. Now, Israel and the Palestinians blame each other for failing to reach an agreement. So what's the alternative? Well,
this is all good points to think about as well. He mentioned the Palestinian refugees that may be on the other side. What if they're not on the side if a border is drawn? Like, what happens to those people? So it's a complicated situation, but this is part of the reason why I say, like, this would not work.
Could be a one-state solution. That would include Israel, the Gaza Strip, and the West Bank. Everybody in it would have equal rights. But Palestinians are worried they would lose their national identity, and Israelis are concerned they would be outnumbered by Palestinians.
Well, the biggest concern right now, I don't even think it's the outnumbering part, because they pushed a lot of them out. But the biggest concern right now that we need to think about is the fact that under a one-state solution, this will be problematic as well, because he said everyone would have equal rights, but they're not going to give them equal rights. They don't even want them there. And it's not just the Palestinians. We need to talk about, we're going to get into this discussion in just a second, about the Ethiopian Jews who are also there.
The US, a longtime ally of Israel's, has been a strong supporter of a two-state solution for decades. But President Trump seems to have indicated that as far as the US is now concerned, two states are no longer the only option.
So that was under Donald Trump. So I wanted to show you guys that. People are still feeling this way. It's going all the way back to President Clinton. So this is not just something that's, happening under Biden. This has been an issue for a long time. But I mentioned to you, what about the Ethiopian Jews? A lot of times we talk about Israel and Palestine and people talk about the Palestinians, but you have to know that there are Ethiopians who are also there that are also being targeted with racism. Now, I want to give a shout out here to Mint Press News, because they really did the thing on this. I want you to see how they're treated, because you'll notice they're going through some of the same things. This is how some of the Ethiopian Jews are being treated in Israel. Check this out.
אנחנו גזענים כדי לרצות לשמור על החיים שלנו ועל השפיות שלנו. אז אני גאה בלהיות גזענית. אני גאה בלהיות גזענית. אם אני גזענית בשביל לשמור על החיים שלי.
Hope you're reading that at the bottom. It says, if I'm racist in order to preserve my life, then I'm proud. This is real footage.
My kids, especially my sons, is not safe here in Israel.
You see this? You see the language? It's not just Palestinians who are being treated this way. This piece right here, the way the Ethiopian Jews are treated, this does not get as much coverage. So they were asking him, what should they do? What does an Ethiopian Israeli have to do to avoid being subjected to police brutality? His response is put on white makeup. That's how bad this is. What an Ethiopian needs to do, he says, leave our country. Does that sound familiar to you? Didn't you hear people make those same kind of remarks here in the United States? Mm-hmm.
כאשר שוטר פוגש חשוד, מטבע הדברים, המוח שלו חושד בו יותר מאשר הוא היה חושד בו.
Police brutality, same issues we're dealing with here in the United States. He said that when a police officer sees an Ethiopian Jew, it is right to suspect him more than anyone else. Same problems that we have here, those of us who are African American with the police, same issue.
כאילו היה מישהו אחר. זה טבעי.
They're calling them infiltrators.
אחרי שראש ממשלת ישראל מר בנימין נתניהו הבטיח לנו שוב ושוב שהוא יפתור את בעיית המסתננים.
Netanyahu promised he would solve the infiltrator problem.
אתה יודע, היום אברי יש נתון של אלפי לידות בשנה, שזה נתון מטורף לכל מגזר שנמצא בארץ.
How many of you saw that before tonight? How many of you saw this? That's Mint Press News, by the way. A lot of people aren't talking about that. A lot of people are not talking about that. But I want to show you this idea of Ethiopians calling for some type of acceptance in Israel. This goes back years, you guys. I have a clip here. Now, this is from CNN. This was 7 years ago. Ethiopian Jews struggle for acceptance in Israel.
Decades of frustration boiled over on the streets of Tel Aviv and across Israel as thousands of Ethiopian Jews protested against discrimination. It wasn't the first time this community has taken to the streets, but now they have the country's attention following a viral video showing 2 Israeli police officers beating an Ethiopian Israeli soldier in uniform. Both officers were fired. But this video was a tipping point, a symptom of a much bigger problem. Ethiopians say they're treated like second-class citizens.
Those young people who were born in Israel and they feel Israelis, but still they are in many points, people see them as Ethiopians.
Mehereta Baruch Ron is the deputy mayor of Tel Aviv, an Ethiopian Jew who came to Israel when she was 10 years old, escaping Ethiopia on foot before she...
Not to mention, some of them may have been born there. So you see, she's lived there since she was 10 years old.
She could fly to Israel.
The Ethiopian Jews dreamed for 2,000 years to get to Jerusalem.
Baruch Ron is a success story for the Ethiopian community, from an illiterate immigrant to a city and community leader. Many of the 140,000 Ethiopian Jews living in Israel today came over in 2 massive airlifts in the late 80s and early 90s. The Ethiopians were welcomed with open arms, but the dream gave way to new challenges.
See, in the beginning, they were welcoming them. See, things change.
The government set up these absorption centers throughout Israel to help Ethiopians get used to a new country. The trouble is, too often, Ethiopians say they struggle to find acceptance.
Unemployment in the Ethiopian community is 13%, nearly 3 times the national average, and Ethiopians earn a third less than Israelis. According to Tebeka, an Ethiopian advocacy group, less than 2% of Israelis are Ethiopians, but Ethiopians make up nearly 20% of the youth prison populations. Ethiopians have been protesting discrimination for years.
Similar to African Americans here in the United States, we're only 13% of the overall population, but we make up majority of the prison population.
Especially in 2013, after the government admitted to coaxing Ethiopian women into taking birth control before moving to Israel. But this time, the protests made a difference. The Prime Minister promised to end racism in Israel, while the Chief of Police is working to end police discrimination.
That was 7 years ago. See, this is why we need to do flashbacks. That was 7 years ago. They said Netanyahu promised to end the racism and discrimination in Israel. How's that working out now? He's more extreme now than he was back then. So that didn't happen.
Admitted there is a problem. There is police violence against the Ethiopian community. And that by itself, I think, is a good starting point.
Community leaders say these changes are a major step in the right direction, but they say they have to work fast while they still have the country's attention. Oren Lieberman, CNN Jerusalem.
So I wanted to show you that so that you can see that this has been an ongoing issue for quite some time. You may hear about it more now, but this has been a problem for a while and it has become worse. Eric, I'm ready for those next tabs whenever you are. And I say this because of this. Here's something you have to understand. When we talk about this idea of a two-state solution, and I compare it to separate but equal, I want to explain to you why I say it that way. In this country, at one point in time, we had separate but equal, so to speak. There was a case called Plessy versus Ferguson, which established that ground. Years later, there was another case called Brown versus Board of Education, which actually proved that Plessy versus Ferguson was not working in this country in reference to separate versus equal, because what lawyers like Thurgood Marshall, he wasn't just a Supreme Court justice. He was one of the lawyers that was on the Brown versus Board of Education case. There were 3 lawyers. He was able to prove that even though these institutions between white people and black people were indeed separate, they were not equal. The school systems weren't equal. The healthcare facilities weren't equal. The transportation systems weren't equal. He was able to prove that, and he was able to prove that it actually caused psychological harm on black kids. They did this by showing this baby doll test. If you have not seen the movie where that talks about this, Sidney Poitier actually plays Thurgood Marshall. You should watch that movie, and it explains all of this. The problem that you are going to run into with a two-state solution is that, yes, they may be separate, but they won't be equal. We have to understand the reality of that. How will they be equal when they have already, when the Israeli government has already occupied so many spaces? How is that going to be equal? It won't be. The Palestinians are the minority. They're not going to be treated equally the same way that the Israelis are. So when people come to me and they tell me this, yes, two-state solution is the, no, it's not. Those people are not going to be equal. And we need to call that out for what it really is. And this was the thing that I think, Nick was trying to explain to Marianne as well. No, we had this discussion with the Palestinian Network, and they made this very clear to us that the two-state solution is not the answer. Not the answer. So I think we all need to refer back to a separate but equal policy that we once had in this country as evidence that this idea does not work out in real time. It does not work because the people who are in the minority are always going to get less than the people who are in the majority. So you're not equal. That's just a reality. Now, I don't have all the answers, but I know one damn thing. I think the United States government needs to stop giving money and weapons to the Israeli government at this point in time. I just showed you what they just did. They came after the people in the mosque. The people can't even go in and pray. And we really think they're going to be equal. I don't think so. I'm going to go to some of the comments, and then we're going to go to the France story, which is where we're going to spend most of our time, because that is a lot to talk about there. Right. That's right, James. AKA apartheid. 100%. 100%. The Jamin says Palestine is sovereign. It's just crazy. It's crazy. Like, when I make sure you share this with people, because when I tell people about what's happening to people over there, it's not just the Palestinians. Make sure when you explain that to people, make sure you tell them what's happening to the Ethiopian Jews there as well. That's right, Sebastian. Free Palestine.